All right, we are back here getting ready for the NFL playoffs. The Giants are in for the first time since 2016. Join me today to break it all down is the guy who covers the Giants, the Star Ledger, great friend of the podcast. Darryl Slater is here. Darryl, Happy New Year. How are you?
Happy New Year. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Yeah, I got to say, it's a lot of fun here if you're a Giant fan right now. And I got to say, if we went back to August here and I told you that on January 9th, you'd be getting ready to cover a Giant playoff game, what would you have thought?
Yeah, no chance, right? I don't think anyone would have thought this team would be in the playoffs. I think probably 4, 5, 6 wins to the ceiling, and they wound up with really essentially 9.5 wins with the tie and 9-7-1 in Brian Daboll's first year. Obviously, they tanked the game yesterday and rested their starters in Philadelphia, and who knows if they would have beat them full strength anyway. They might get a chance to if things fall the right way, and if the Giants beat the Vikings in Minnesota. So it's certainly an overachieving first year for Brian Daboll, no doubt.
Yeah, I gotta say, I mean, I think the way they approached the game was the correct one yesterday because obviously they had nothing to gain.
Yeah.
They've been so banged up all year with all these guys. They basically set everybody importance here, though. You gotta give the backups credit and the coaches their credit here that like they easily could have just mailed it in when they were down 16-0 early on, but they did fight to get themselves back in that game.
Yeah, and it's not like the Eagles were out for blood either. I mean, the Cowboys were going to lose, were losing to the Commanders anyway. The Eagles were in control. They wanted to get out of there healthy as well, even though they did play their starters. So, I think the right approach there for Brian Daboll. And I think ultimately, if they do go and get crushed in Minnesota, I don't think the reason is that they rested their starters. The reason is that the Vikings just have a lot more talent than the Giants. Even though, as we've seen this year, 13-14 that going into Week 18 had a minus 19 point differential in the Vikings. They're certainly beatable, as we saw on Christmas Eve when the Giants almost got a chance to beat them in overtime, but the 61-yard field goal. And so a really juicy rematch opportunity here.
Yeah, for sure here. Before we get to that rematch here, I want to touch on Brian Daboll here because obviously what he did was remarkable. You look at the names in this roster, especially some positions like the receiving core and like some of the key defensive spots. You look at you're like, this team should be winning like 4 games. So like, considering the fact they've won 9, you said basically 9.5, they're in the playoffs here. Is there any way that Brian Daboll's not coach of the year?
Well, I think Nick Sirianni has an argument for that. I think Doug Peterson certainly has a really good argument for that. Brian Daboll has as good of an argument as anybody, considering the state of his roster and considering the way he's elevated Daniel Jones this year, and not only the state of the roster. They were a thin roster going in, and then they had so much attrition at receiver, and they traded Kadarius Toney. They lost Sterling Shepard to his injury. And now it's not like the offense has lit it up in spite of all that. They really haven't, but they found ways to win. They found ways to win close games. They found ways to win late in games, and at times winning with defense is. But again, it's not like, if you look at the PFF ratings, this team is like low in those. I mean, their defense is not highly rated. They give up big chunks of yards. They're really good in the red zone, and they're really good defensively and offensively. They're really good in the red zone. So they're an opportunistic team, and certainly a much better coach team than they've been in years. And I think all along, if you go into this Giants season last year, right, and you thought, okay, well, the GM doesn't have the ability to go and make these win now moves in free agency because Joe Shane was hamstrung by the bad cap situation that Dave Gettleman left him in. This was always going to be a coaching season, whether Joe Judge was the coach or Brian Daboll was the coach. In that, the coaching staff was going to have to make a big difference for whatever this team was going to accomplish. Now, next year is a different story. They have a lot more cap space. And Joe Shane can do a better job or a more complete job of putting his imprint on this team. But this was always going to be a coaching season, and Brian Daboll and his coaching staff certainly rose to the occasion.
Yeah, they definitely did. It also makes you feel good if you're a Giant fan knowing that like Brian Daboll got my team to the playoffs with like this little talent on it. Imagine what he's going to look like when he actually gets the players he actually wants in here.
Yeah, and they got into the playoffs like legit too as a 6 seed, not this like silly 7th seed that you see is like very, it's become kind of watered down, right? I mean, in the limited time that we've seen this 7th seed, I mean, the Bears like fired their staff after their coach ever getting the playoffs as the 7th seed, but the Giants got in as a 6th seed, so they would have been in under the old format too. And I think that there's a lot of signs of hope now. there's a big task ahead for improving this roster because the schedule is going to get harder just by virtue of the season that they had, and they don't have the draft haul to go out and address things that way. But yeah, I mean, repeating this is not going to be easy. Obviously, they have to make improvements to the roster. But in terms of like where they stand right now, Giants fans should be overjoyed, regardless of whatever happens in Minnesota this week. This is a successful first season, no doubt, for Brian Daboll.
Absolutely is here, and obviously we got to touch on the elephant room here. That the fact that the Giants and Vikings played just a couple of weeks ago, that game is fresh in the mind of Giant fans. Like, what was your big takeaways from the first matchup? They ends up coming down to that 61-yard field goal. Greg Joseph hits at the gun to win it from Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was clear that the Giants can play with this team and they can move the ball on the Vikings. And that's something that you haven't been able to say about a lot of teams the Giants have faced, over the past 3 years. Really, they have not been able to consistently move the ball. They had an absurd streak, I think, of like 43 straight games of not scoring 30 plus points that was snapped when they played the Colts, who were obviously horrible, and clinched the playoff spot. But they haven't been an explosive offense, but they were able to move the ball against the Vikings. So I think that they can take. And they moved the ball really well in a big spot late in the game when they tied it with that long touchdown drive. So I think they can take some encouragement from that. They obviously have to do a better job of covering Justin Jefferson on a hole and in big spots. Obviously, his 17-yard catch on that 3rd and 11 play helped set up an improbable field goal. But still, if they hold him there, then to even 10 yards, the game's going to overtime. Those are certainly areas where they have to look at and see how they can do a better job. But they can definitely take a lot of encouraging things from that first game.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at the way the bracket falls in the NFC here. I mean, considering they were never gets the 5 seed with the way Philly and Dallas were. I mean, their options here, considering the other option was San Francisco, they're plus 173 point differential. The Vikings, same 13-4 record, but a minus 3 point differential. I feel like the Giants have not written this up any better, considering where they ended up falling in the standings.
Yeah, no, Aaron Rodgers did him a huge favor by beating the Vikings last week, not this past week, but the week prior, which dropped the Vikings down to the 3 seed, which the 49ers previously had. So San Francisco is up to the 2 seed, and obviously I think it's a better reflection of like the quality of their team compared to the Vikings. But yeah, this is a good matchup for the Vikings or the Giants on many levels. They've played this team, they've moved the ball against this team. It's a shorter trip. They've played in this setting recently. Yeah, I mean, they haven't played the Niners this year. It's a long trip. The Niners have an absurdly good defense. So I think the Giants, I wrote it early last week, and when it looked like, obviously, it was going to be Minnesota. The Giants should be really happy that this is their matchup. And, they could get Philly in the second round, I guess, right? Unless, for whatever reason, Seattle beats San Francisco. If the Giants beat the Vikings and then they go to Philly. No, I mean, the Eagles crush them, and we'll see. We'll cross that. I'm sure they'll cross that bridge, obviously, when they get to it. But that's one that they're familiar with the Eagles, obviously. So anyway, but I think that this first matchup is a good one for the Giants. It's not a sure thing win, certainly, but they should feel optimistic about their chances in this game.
Yeah, definitely think it's one of the more interesting games of the weekend here. The NFL clearly feels it's going to be a great game, too. I mean, they put it in that prime, 4:30 Sunday slot, which is supposedly the game of the weekend usually. So I think the NFL has faith this is going to be a very good game, too.
Yeah, for sure. And a big market team in the Giants. So I think that definitely played into that.
Yeah, absolutely, here. And I do think, one thing I worry about here as I'm a Giant fan is I feel like there's a lot of public perception that's going to be the Giants can win this game. I think the point spread says as much here, and there's a lot of this. But, Minnesota did not win 13 games by accident here. I do feel like there's a possibility here that, the Giants have to be careful they don't get, too caught up in, all the hype around this game. They can win this game. I feel like a lot of people picking them. Minnesota is still very talented. I feel like they're still going to have issues, stopping Justin Jefferson like he did the first time.
They're going to have a lot of issues stopping Justin Jefferson. Just based on the reality of the way his season has unfolded. And, there's a couple things at play here. I mean, is Adoree Jackson going to be back from his knee injury? He hasn't played since November 20th. He hasn't played a full game since the week prior. So it'll be 2 months since he's played a full game, if he's even back. Now, he played it secretive last night after the game about whether he'd play this week. He even said, he'd be hesitant to play hurt because he doesn't want to hinder the Giants' secondary. And be at. You could make the argument that he at less than 100% is better than, say, Fabian Moreau at 100%. But the fact remains that it's supposedly still unclear whether he'll play this weekend. We'll see. I think he ultimately does play Adoree Jackson, but Justin Jefferson's gotten over on plenty of good corners this year. I mean, Xavier McKinney, their Giants free safety, after the game last night expressed a lot of confidence that the Giants could shut Justin Jefferson down. I had a story up there last night on that. And he said that he's not somebody that we haven't seen be stopped before. He said Xavier McKinney said that about Justin Jefferson, which, yeah, sure. I mean, some teams have stopped him. The Eagles held him to 48 yards, the Jets to 45, the Lions to 14. Okay, that's three. But if you look at his other games, I mean, he's gone for, I have it right here in front of me, 223, 193, 184, 154, 147, and 139. So his 133 against the Giants was actually his seventh highest total of the year, which is crazy. I mean, that's like the best game of the year for a lot of receivers. Obviously, this guy's the best receiver in the league, and so it's going to be a huge challenge, regardless of whether they have Adoree Jackson or not. But it certainly would help if they do have him.
Yeah, definitely would here. I think for me, I feel like the key to this game for the Giants is obviously I look at the first game here. It's like Daniel Jones up throwing a lot, threw 42 passes in that game, and Saquon Barkley at 14 carries. I feel like the Giants, if they're going to win this game, had to get Saquon more involved on the running game front. I feel like you want to try and keep Kirk Cousins in that offense off the field as long as you possibly can.
Yes, I think so. That's a good point. I mean, they were down, I believe, 10-0 in that game. So they did have to throw the ball a little bit to get back into it. I haven't looked at the full breakdown of like when they ran the ball or how committed they ever were to the run in that game. But yeah, I mean, that was a game where they were down 10-0 until late in the first half, and managed to come back and take the lead going into the fourth quarter. Actually, Minnesota took the lead back like 45 seconds into the fourth quarter, but they had the lead going into the fourth quarter, and so it's another example of a Giants team that's been resilient all year and has been able to play mostly well in the fourth quarter. Obviously, they lost that game in the fourth quarter, but yeah, I think that there's certainly, a lot of things. You talk about moving the ball, and Saquon Barkley had the 27-yard touchdown run to tie the game there before the 2-point conversion with 2 minutes left, right? So there's some encouraging things there that, he can probably, he might be able to, Barkley get some yards against his defense, and this Vikings defense has been, at times you can get over on them a little bit, and the Giants know that, and there's film out there of that. So because it's a rematch, I mean, it's going to be I don't know how many of these other games are. Miami, Buffalo, obviously. I haven't looked at how many of the Baltimore, Cincinnati, right? So like, there's some rematches there, but because it's a rematch, it's an intriguing one here for the Giants.
Yeah, I think it definitely is here. And like in terms of like besides Barkley, what do you think your keys to the game are for the Giants to win this game?
Yeah, Barkley, Jefferson, they have to do a better job in those situations of just limiting Jefferson to, limiting his big plays. I mean, he's going to get yards. They got to get some pressure on Kirk Cousins, and they've done a better job lately of getting pressure. And a big factor in that will be Azeez Ojulari, who's been dealing with injuries all year. I mean, a lot of talk about Kayvon Thibodeau. He's been in the news, obviously, for the Nick Foles thing. And it has played well. I mean, you talk about the game that pretty much put him into the playoffs, winning in Washington on Sunday night. Kayvon Thibodeau, almost kind of won that game for them with the strip sack, then the stop of Taylor Heineke at the goal line. But Azeez Ojulari on a play-in, play-out basis has played really well. He just had a hard time staying healthy with a calf injury, now an ankle injury. So that's something to watch this week, along with the Adoree Jackson knee situation. Is will Azeez Ojulari be ready to play? I mean, he got hurt in this game. Suffered a lateral ankle sprain against the Vikings, and really has not been back to full 100% yet. So the rest, what you would think would help him, the fact that he didn't play against the Eagles yesterday. So they're going to have to do a good job of getting some pressure on Kirk Cousins and not letting him just sit back there and giving time to Justin Jefferson to kind of get open and pick apart that secondary.
All right, real quick, while I have you, I want to get your take real quick on the rest of the NFC playoff games here. Obviously, you got the 49ers Seahawks on Saturday, and then you have the Cowboy Buck game on Monday night. What do you think about those two games?
Yeah, I don't think Dallas should have much problem with Tampa. I guess it all depends really on what version of Tom Brady you're getting. I mean, he still can do it, which is remarkable. You saw a couple weeks ago, he still can play really, really well in the clutch, but I think Dallas should be able to get it together and beat that Tampa team. They've had a lot of issues, obviously, in Tampa this year. It would be honestly a colossal disappointment if the Cowboys lose that game. That would be you could be looking at the end of Mike McCarthy's time in Dallas if they lose that game. And hey, maybe if they lose in the divisional round, maybe Jerry Jones pulls the plug on it anyway. There, but I think the Niners should be able to beat Seattle. I mean, you look at Seattle yesterday; they had to beat, or they didn't have to beat the Rams, but a situation where that would have helped. They were able to win 19-16 in overtime, but they've stubbed their toe a little bit here late. The Seahawks have. I mean, they started 6-3. Wound up, going 1-5 after that. So, I feel like probably regressed to the mean a little bit there. Geno Smith's had a nice year. He's been a great story, but the Niners defense, Nick Bosa, are just so ridiculous. So I think probably chalk holds in that San Francisco-Seattle game with San Francisco moving on as the 2, and then I'll take Dallas in the other game. So that would put San Fran and Dallas, which is always an awesome matchup in the divisional round. And then yeah, I don't see it for the Giants. To me, a 3 is a reasonable line just because of how close the Vikings have played so many games this year and how beatable they've looked at times. I mean, you mentioned their current point differential, and going into week 18, it was -19 for a 12-14, which is almost like impossible. But I do think, and I'll have to actually change the divisional round pick, because if the Vikings do win, then it would be Vikings, Niners, and then Dallas would play Philly. So that's how it would work. But as I was looking at the bracket, I got ahead of myself there. But if the Giants do win, then it would be Dallas, Niners, and Giants, Philly, which would be 2 really awesome matchups in the divisional round. But I'll pick the Vikings. The Giants have a chance. If they were going to San Francisco, I would give them probably a 10 to 20% chance of winning the game. This one, I think you look at and they say they probably have, a 30 or 40% chance of winning the game.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like the AFC side, I feel like is much more cut and dry, especially because you have these situations going on with the quarterback injuries with Tua in Miami, who might not be cleared to play in this game. Who knows, Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, if he goes in there. I think the game to watch is ironically the Jacksonville Charger game on Saturday night. I feel like that game's going to be a lot of fun.
I was kind of surprised they put that game on Saturday, because that's kind of like the weird game and like the game that's got a smaller market team in it. And, well, honestly, let's be honest, 2 teams that like most people just don't care about. I mean, they have relatively small. I mean, you could get a ticket to either of those teams' games, I would think, at least Jacksonville, for nothing most of the time. But it is an intriguing game because you do have two players and 2 quarterbacks who are going to be around for a long time in this league, in Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence. And Lawrence has really taken the next step this year, and now that he has a competent head coach. So that one to me is a toss-up, with the Chargers having to come all the way across the country to play in Jacksonville. The other ones, I think Buffalo should be fine. Cincinnati should be fine. So you'll have the 1, the 2, and the 3 moving on, obviously, since Kansas City already has the bye. So the other one is a really fascinating toss-up. But I'll go ahead and just take the better story in Jacksonville. Why not, right? I mean, let's see if Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence can keep this going. He's a tremendous talent, there's no doubt, and the Jets really missed out. I mean, ultimately, if you think about it, they weren't able to get the number. I have to go back and think how that end of that season went, but I think they did win a game. The Jets did late, I think maybe against the Rams that previous year in 2020. He was a huge upset. And I think in retrospect that did knock them out of the hunt for Trevor Lawrence. I'd have to go back and run the numbers. Anyway, they got Zach Wilson instead of Trevor Lawrence, and it's very obvious to everybody that not only is Trevor Lawrence a better quarterback than Zach Wilson, low bar there, but he could be one of the better quarterbacks in this league for years to come. And this could be his arrival moment on Saturday night in that home game against the Chargers.
Yeah, I remember that situation very well. It was really, I think the Jets, based on the strength of schedule situation, the Jets really could not afford to win a game. They were not going to get that pick. And the way the division's set up right now, the ineptitude and the other three teams, so Jacksonville sort of set up to run that division for a while.
For sure, and they made a really good hire finally, and they've stuck with some coaches who obviously were not, were not going to be long term solutions, obviously, but they gave guys a chance, Doug Marrone, and who won some games there. But to Shad Khan's credit, he decided Urban Meyer, and it was obvious to everybody, like, this is not going to work, and he moved on quickly. And they not only moved on quickly, but he made a great hire. I think Doug Peterson is perfect for that situation. He had gotten tired, Peterson had, of some of the micromanaging, a lot of the micromanaging in Philly from Jeffrey Lurie, and he's in a situation now where he obviously has more ability to run the show down there, and it's a great spot for him. He can mentor a young quarterback who was really eager to, have a coach who knew what the heck he was doing, command some respect from that locker room. And so, that'll be a fun one to see. I think Doug Peterson's got plenty of years left as a coach in this league. And he and Trevor Lawrence could be together for a while because, the bar is low for success in Jacksonville. I think, this is the type of season where, it's going to buy Doug Peterson a couple of years. And not only that, more importantly, it's going to give Trevor Lawrence a ton of confidence for what he can do. And he's made some incredible throws. You look at some of the best quarterback throws in the back half of the season. He's right up there. And so he's a fun guy to watch. And so that'll be certainly a fun game on Saturday night, even if, maybe it doesn't draw a huge rating, but I think just from an objective standpoint, it's a really cool game. And probably, I think definitely will be the most competitive of those three AFC wildcard first-round games.
Absolutely, Darryl. Thanks all the time. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, can people follow on social media? Keep up your coverage of the Giants for the Star Ledger.
Yep, it's Darryl Slater at DarrylSlater on Twitter. And so I appreciate everyone reading, and thanks for having me up.
Thanks again for all the time. I really appreciate it.
All right, take care.